a valid resource.
And of note, Chris does play 2 of the show and tells in the main deck. We see Rudy on the play chooses to keep. He has kept a 2-lander with many of the tools he needs. Deathrite Shaman in the opener, accompanied by Swords to Plowshares, Brainstorm, and Force of Will.
And a great opening for Rudy here as he leads off with Deathrite Shaman.
Yeah, and you said that this was really important, especially because Rudy's on the play. It means he will be able to activate the Deathrite Shaman. Looking over at VanMeter's hand, it looks like he has an Entomb Reanimate hand. This has got to throw a wrench in his plans.
Yeah, of course. Now the Reanimator deck can actually go off on the first turn through Lotus Petal, Entomb, Reanimate, and a land. It's not unheard of. So, of course, fighting through Force of Will here is maybe something that Chris is not equipped to do, but Chris can actually get his Reanimate online faster than Rudy can even activate Deathrite Shaman potentially.
All right, so the draw for Chris is going to be Exhume. He has a lot of the graveyard cards in his opening hand. Going to have to figure out a way around Deathrite Shaman. We see turn 1, Underground Sea. And we have Brainstorm, Reanimate. Looks like he does have a Lotus Petal here. He may be able to go for the entire combo on turn 1, as you mentioned.
I believe he is missing Entomb. He has
a
Gristlebrand, a couple reanimation spells, and a Brainstorm, but I don't think a way to get into his graveyard.
Okay, so he's going to go ahead and Brainstorm with that first turn. Remember, he does play 2 copies of Show and Tell in the main. If he can find one of those, he can actually do his post-board plan in game 1.
Mm-hmm. Remember, for those of you who are new to our elimination rounds, we're going to be giving away 3, 6, and 12 months of Star City Games Premium in between the quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals, so make sure to stay tuned for that opportunity.
All right, and we see draw a pair of Force of Wills and another Brainstorm. Chris is going to put a couple cards back here. We will see what they are. He does have the Fetch Land in his hand, so he's going to only have to redraw one of these cards. And it looks like he doesn't want the Fetch Land, so he's going to put Brainstorm on top as his draw next turn. Yeah, that's actually his second Fetch Land. He has 2 lands, so he's binning one of the lands, keeping the other one, and keeping the rest of the cards in his hand.
So Chris, potentially with that Brainstorm, looking for a Lotus Petal and an Entomb, which would have allowed him to go off on the first turn there.
Yeah, now we are back to Rudy, and his draw for the turn is pretty good. It's going to be Thoughtseize, and he's going to go ahead and fire that off. Now he'll get to see what Chris is working with.
But keep in mind, Rudy is temporarily shields down with this Deathrite Shaman. He doesn't have access to green mana, so the coast is kind of clear for Chris to set something up.
Yeah, the Esper Deathblade mana base, you see Bayou and Tundra there, pretty ambitious on the mana, and sometimes it can get you. We'll see what he takes, though. You have Reanimate and Exhume, a land, Lotus Petal, 2 forces, and a Gristlebrand. Looks like Rudy's just going to slow him down. He's motioning toward Lotus Petal. We'll see actually what he takes here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is there I'd say normally you don't want to take Gristlebrand. That's the worst card here. The reanimation spells don't seem like too much of a threat. It seems like his Force of Will to take here. Chris doesn't have a second blue card. Or do you just take the Petal?
I think Force of Will is probably the card to take here. The game's going to go at a pretty slow pace, so it's hard to imagine mana being the bottleneck that Chris is eventually going to confront. And those Force of Wills are pretty dangerous. It potentially allows Chris to push through a Show and Tell, even though he's not situated to do that right now. Down the line he can be. And again, it's going to take Rudy a while to actually win the game. So
yeah. And after seeing that, Rudy's okay going shields down for one more turn. He's going to tap out for Stoneforge Mystic. This will allow him to pretty reasonably speed up his clock.
Yeah. It's important for him not to sit on his hands all day. Even this one Deathrite Shaman, as good as it is, and it's definitely constricting Chris in a number of ways, it's not going to hold off Chris forever.
Yeah, so Rudy finds Sword of Fire and Ice. Now, you mentioned the Show and Tells. Not every player would expect to see Show and Tells game 1 out of Reanimator. However, because we are in the top 8, Rudy does know that there are 2 Show and Tells in the main deck of Chris VanMeter.
Yeah. The Reanimator deck that won in Columbus last week, I believe, was also on a halfway Show and Tell plan in game 1.
All right. So we see the draw from Chris. It was the Brainstorm that we knew about. He does still have 1 land left. The top card of his deck is a Misty Rainforest. He has no interest in it, though. He's going to crack Polluted Delta and get a new top card before he starts digging. Yeah,
Chris has a pretty high incentive here to try to go off this turn, as this may be the last turn of the game where Deathrite Shaman shields are down.
Yeah. If he casts Brainstorm here, he will not have that blue card for Force of Will. He really needs to brainstorm to something spicy. He needs to maybe hit a Show and Tell and an additional blue card. But if he does, that will be enough.
Now, Chris is not in a position where he can really afford to play around Force of Will either. Again, this Deathrite Shaman cuts off so many angles that if this is his window to do it, he's gonna go for a reanimate here if he can, regardless of whether or not he has Force of Will backup.
Yeah, he's going to have to. Yeah, he'll go for whatever he has. Even if he finds Careful Study, actually, that should be good enough here. He needs Careful Study plus blue card. He doesn't know about the blue card half of it, but he could discard his Gristlebrand and then try to reanimate it.
And Rudy is really contemplating this Brainstorm. There's a reason here, he knows about Chris's hand with the exception of that Brainstorm that, Chris drew this turn. And if Rudy's under the impression that Chris needs to find multiple cards this turn to be able to go off, which he does, there's definitely an argument for potentially fighting over Brainstorm.
Yeah, now, Chris did not particularly find what he was looking for. He found another Lotus Petal, he found a land and a Thoughtseize. So nothing to help him combo off. He did get himself a chance to rebuy, though. He can crack a fetch land to shuffle away the cards he doesn't want. He can Thoughtseize Rudy's Force of Will away, and then he'll be at the mercy of the top deck. But at the very least, he has a chance then.
Yeah.
And all in all, this is looking pretty good for Briska game one. If he can get game one, that's quite the steal for him.
Yeah, and his draw here on the play is about as good as you can ask for. Deathrite into Stoneforge with a Thoughtseize and Force of Will backup. Couldn't really draw up a better hand.
All right, as we see here, to sign put back, he's already put back a 1 reanimate spell. It was an Exhume. See what else he wants to put back on top. Doesn't particularly, yeah, he's thinking about Lotus Petal, and yeah. All right, Lotus Petal is one on top. And actually, the fetch land will be the other one, so. Yeah, still resolving Brainstorm. He's hanging on to actually, yeah, both his Exhume and his Reanimate here. Reanimate's probably, Exhume is probably the better card here because if he can manage to dump 2 creatures in the graveyard, Exhume is a non-targeted reanimate spell, so it actually can get around Deathrite Shaman. And he's gonna go ahead and Thoughtseize himself. And it's gonna get Force of Will.
Only in Legacy.
Thoughtseize myself? No. I'll pay 1. That can't allow that.
And in spite of this opening from Briska, I mean, Chris VanMeter was basically a blue card away from being able to reanimate that turn.
And that's actually, VanMeter's got to be pretty happy that Rudy forced there. If Chris had discarded the Gristlebrand, which he was going to, he would have tried to reanimate it. Rudy could have forced there and then used Deathrite to eat the Gristlebrand. Chris would be in a much worse spot if Rudy had let the Thoughtseize resolve.
Yeah.
And Stoneforge will swing in. Deathrite will make mana, and Liliana of the Veil will be the play for Rudy. And he's going shields down quite a bit here.
Yeah. And he can't actually plus the Liliana because if he fought over Thoughtseize, he certainly doesn't want to make Chris discard. So a little bit of a curious sequence here from Rudy.
Yeah, I mean, I think if the reanimation target for Chris is something other than Gristlebrand, Liliana's very good. However, Rudy has seen Chris's hand. He knows the monster is Gristlebrand. If the Gristlebrand hits on the table, Liliana edicting it won't accomplish very much. So, Flooded Strand, the draw for Briska. He still has Sword of Fire Ice. He has Swords to Plowshares. He is going to just pass the turn, planning to end step, go to work on Chris's life total, and put Sword into play.
Trying to speed up his clock a little bit here. He'll be able to equip that sword to the Stoneforge Mystic and still leave up Deathrite Shaman.
So let's go back to the Liliana play. What does he gain from getting the Liliana out right now? If he can't plus it, and minusing it doesn't work, doesn't stop a Gristlebrand, what is it doing?
It's mana efficient this turn to get into play if he's under the impression that Chris can't go off that turn. If he thinks Chris can go off, not that turn, but perhaps on a following turn, he might as well use his mana right there. But it's really hard to imagine Rudy has enough information to confidently say that's what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, he could plus the Liliana on his own turn and then immediately Deathrite the card, right?
Well, he was out of mana that turn. He
Yeah,
had to tap out.
this following turn he can. All right, Chris will play 2 Lotus Petals, pass back. On end step, Rudy's going to exile Thoughtseize, dealing 2 to Chris, and he's going to put Sword of Fire Ice into play.
Well, I still think that you open yourself up to some risk of using your Deathrite Shaman on your own main phase. Because who knows if Chris has other tools to go off. Maybe he has a Careful Study. Maybe he has an Entomb. You know, the Reanimator deck has to go off at sorcery speed. That's it. So there's no reason to do anything too fancy with your Deathrite Shaman. Just react once Chris tries to do something.
Right.
Don't put yourself in a position where you need to use it on your own turn.
So really, the Liliana, despite being mana efficient, yeah, doesn't seem to be doing much.
Well, it is some insurance. It means that, you know, if Chris does reanimate, let's say he does reanimate Gristlebrand, you know, if Rudy doesn't cast the Liliana, then Chris has a bunch of opportunities to find Force of Will to then counter the Liliana on the way in. This way it's in play. Even if something does enter the table, Rudy has the option of just getting rid of it right away with Liliana.
All right, and the swing now comes in. Stoneforge Mystic with Sword of Fire Ice on it. Hits for 5. Well, 3 then 2. Draws Rudy a card. That's Jace the Mind Sculptor. And Chris is on a 2-turn clock now, thanks to Deathrite Shaman and Stoneforge Mystic. Brainstorm will be eaten. Chris drops to 8. Chris with another land passes back. He still has not found the way to put the Gristlebrand in the yard or a way to show and tell into play. We're back on Rudy's turn. Chris goes down to 3.
And this hit is critical as it means that Chris can no longer cast the spell Reanimate on any of his targets, nor if he's even able to find a way to get Gristlebrand in play, he can't draw cards on this turn, so Rudy's Swords to Plowshares is alive as well.
And Wasteland will hit Underground Sea. And we'll see if Chris can get anything. It's just another Exhume, and game 1 will go ahead and go in Rudy Brixa's favor. So he is up a game on Chris VanMeter, possibly able to deal one of our 2 undefeated players his first loss of the tournament.
And that was exactly how Rudy wanted to script that one up. A mixture of hand disruption and Thoughtseize, an early Deathrite Shaman, a Forcible and a blue card, pressure through Stoneforge Mystic. He, you know, pretty much can't ask for a better hand than the one he just found. Welcome back to the booth. Patrick Sullivan, Matthias Hunt, Starter City Games Legacy Open Top 8 here in Baltimore. It is trivia time. And the way that this works is, in this case, I will ask you a question.
All right.
Pertaining to one of the matches that's going on or some other interesting little tidbit. You will tweet that answer at SCG Live and hashtag SCG Premium. Of the correct responses, 1 will be selected, and that person will receive 3 free months of Star City Games Premium. And it is about accuracy, not speed, so don't worry about having to be the first one to answer. Also, make sure you're following us at SCG Live so we can go and get your prize to you. And that question is, we've been watching a lot of Reanimator lately. Good showing in Columbus, good showing in Orlando. Chris VanMeter finds himself in the top 8 here. Most of the reanimation targets in this are singleton bullets for specific situations. However, there is one reanimator target that this deck plays a full play set of. So what is that monstrous fatty? Tweet your answer at SCG Live and hashtag SCG Premium. And again, one of you will be selected to receive 3 free months of Star City Games Premium content.
All right, so let's bring us back into the match. We're going to talk about some of the sideboarding here, especially from the Chris VanMeter side as he is down a game. As you said before, the graveyard strategy is not as robust after board. He's going to go to a more show and tell based plan. And looking over sideboard, we kind of see that there's the extra 2 show and tells on his board. What else can he do though?
Well, over on Chris's side of the table here, he can bring in the City of Traders to go along with his copies of Show and Tell to try to have a more explosive kill. He can bring additional disruption in Thoughtseize, Massacre if he's worried about a threat like Meddling Mage. I'm not sure if that's in Rudy's sideboard here. Does not appear to be. He can bring in additional copies of things like Spell Pierce and Flutter Storm to fight over Show and Tell. A lot of this depends on exactly how much sideboard hate Rudy has, and Chris has the list in front of him, so he's working with full information. In a lot of cases, you know, you don't exactly know how much graveyard hate your Esper Blade opponent has. You try to de-emphasize that a little bit because most of them have some mixture of Surgical Extractions and potentially Rest in Pieces as well, Tormod Scripts, all those kind of cards. And so you want to convert more into a show and tell deck in the post-board games. But if Rudy's a little light on graveyard hate, then Chris can keep his core strategy intact.
Yeah, and that's where we see cards like City of Traders get boarded in so that he still has the explosive nature in the deck. You know, he can still turn 2 despite the fact that show and tell costs 3. He does play 2 of those in the sideboard. We've said before, when we saw this matchup, we were asking whether or not you can board in cards like Thoughtseize, how much, you know, Spell Pierce, how much disruption does Chris actually want to have in the deck?
Well, I think the fact that Deathrite Shaman is a card in Rudy's deck changes the equation a little bit. When you're playing against a conventional Esper Blade list, they only have a couple counter spells and a couple discard spells, and you can kind of sit around and build up a quality hand because they don't have that much disruption and they don't have that much pressure. But because Deathrite Shaman causes Chris to have to contort his game plan so much, there's an argument for bringing in Thoughtseize just to fight over that card specifically.
All right, so we'll look at Rudy's side of the matchup here then as well. On his side, we've seen him board this before. The cards he boarded in Pithing Needle. That was just to name Gristlebrand. He also, at that part, used Flusterstorm, Force of Will, Surgical Extraction, and Swan Song in the matchup. Swan Song actually really relevant for him in his match against Todd Anderson.
Yeah, and I actually think that in this matchup, Chris is possibly going to go to Inkwell Leviathan as his reanimation target of choice. It's really hard for Rudy to interact with, and the rest of the creatures, you know, there's the Pithing Needle that can potentially answer his Gristlebrand, and there's even Notion Thief that we saw come up in the last open as well as another card to fight Gristlebrand. So Inkwell Leviathan might be his most reliable animation or show and tell target.
Yeah. So in this game, Chris, as he is the 5 seed in. He will get to be on the play as he's down a game. One thing that we saw before is that the Deathrite Shaman on the play from Rudy really was difficult for Chris's deck to deal with. But because he can actually turn 2 and not be scared of Deathrite Shaman, does that affect, you know, does he need to play for more speed in this matchup, in this game now that he's on the play? Or does it affect the kind of hands, I guess, he wants to keep versus mulligan?
Well, certainly the fact that his most explosive offerings on the play ignore Deathrite Shaman changed the matchup a little bit. Still, it's not just Deathrite Shaman that he's fighting through here. He's also fighting through counter spells and hand disruption and a litany of other threats as well. So Deathrite Shaman is just one piece of the puzzle that Rudy has access to.
All right, both players shuffling. We should have the game underway in just a second. This is our top 8, if you're joining us, in Star City Games Legacy Open here in Baltimore. Matthias Hunt joined by Patrick Sullivan. We're watching the 4-5 matchup between Chris VanMeter and Rudy Briska.
These are two of our more accomplished Open Series competitors over the last year, having good Grand Prix results as well. Rudy, I believe, was a top 16 finisher in the Legacy Grand Prix in DC recently. And Chris has been putting up quite a few good results himself.
And as you can see there, Chris VanMeter currently 5th in the Charlotte Invitational standings. We had Brad Nelson in 3rd on our top 4 this morning. Chris, another one of those players who still is within striking distance of William Jensen. And we are underway. Chris, I talked to him a little bit about the matchup before. He said post-board he boards out, he says, 7 of the 12 graveyard cards. He's referring to, of course, Entomb, Exhume, and Reanimate. He says he keeps about 2, 2, and 1, maybe about 2 Entombs, 2 Exhumes, and a Reanimate.
Yeah, so he doesn't cut that aspect of his deck entirely, but he definitely de-emphasizes it, seeing Chris take a mulligan.
Right,
and Rudy has, again, it appears that he has a turn 1 Deathrite Shaman and also has his 1 Caracas in his hand as well. So another excellent opening hand here for Rudy.
Yeah, Rudy does play 1 Caracas in the deck. That's really huge, especially if Chris is on if he's on a show and tell plan, it really affects what he can show and tell into play. He only has 2 creatures that are not legendary. That would be Tidespout Tyrant and Inkwell Leviathan. I'm not even convinced that Tidespout Tyrant is still in the deck at this point.
Yeah. It's possible he's brought in the Ashen Rider as well.
Okay, so he has some options, but yeah, it takes away a lot of the monsters that he could make. Really can be shut down by Caracas.
Yeah. So Rudy's playing that card basically as a freebie, but in the appropriate matchup, Sneak and Show and Reanimator, that 1 Caracas can be a huge swing.
All right, so Rudy has kept to 7, as we see here. Chris going to 6 cards here. Little bummed out about it, but we will. Once again, the combo decks of Legacy are all pretty good at mulliganing. Reanimator is no exception. Let me see. Reanimate, Iona, Needle, Brainstorm, 1 land, and Ponder.
I think this looks like a pretty good 6-card hand.
Yeah, not ideal. The number of lands is really low. The Reanimate's not really a card here, but it can play. You know, you'll find a turn 1 underground sea.
Yeah. And that Pithy Needle shuts out a card like Deathrite Shaman as well, potentially stops Caracas, so that answers a lot of Rudy's anti-legend, anti-graveyard cards.
All right, and so turn 1, we'll see what he chooses to go for here. It's going to be Ponder. That's let out. And we'll see what he manages to get here. We have a Careful Study in a pair of black cards.
Well, he has Entomb.
Yeah, there's a danger. I don't think he's hit a land here. Yeah, it's Entomb Exhume. That's excellent. He has no second land, but he does have a full combo here. It's pretty tempting.
Yeah.
Especially with that Careful Study, my guess is he will still keep it.
Yeah, it's going to be, you know, a hand that could go off over the course of 2 turns, and any disruption that Rudy plays will require him to potentially play that Pithy Needle, which is another turn off. So,
yep. Rudy goes to 19. He will start his game underway, and that will once again be with Deathrite Shaman. That will force Chris to take at least 1 turn to respond to it.
yeah, since Chris can't go off this next turn here, if with a second land he would be able to at least try. I think he's going to spend next turn just using the Pithy Needle to stop Deathrite Shaman.
Yeah. That does concede no land drop. We'll see he also has now drawn the Careful Study. He carefully hid that on top of his deck. If he casts it, he'll get to go 1 card deeper. High risk, high reward. If that second card deeper is a land, it's a pretty good one for him, but he could set himself back a turn by doing so.
Yeah, it's a huge risk. You let Rudy untap with the Deathrite Shaman that's capable of making mana.
And we see Rudy with Planeswalkers in his hand, at least a Jace, maybe even multiple. Yeah, it looks like Liliana and Jace. But Chris is going to do it. He's going to start with the Careful Study. And did he hit the land? He did not. The second card was Spell Pierce.
It's a risky play to go for there. I don't think necessarily wrong. It's huge upside if he finds a second land, but
And
now the trouble starts.
Right, so we see he's going to go ahead. He's even going to discard the Iona here into a Deathrite Shaman. That's it's a bold move. I mean, to me, that says that doesn't have any intention really of reanimating the Iona. He's going to go for the full graveyard combo.
Well, it's worth noting here that this really taxes Rudy's resources. He has to respect that Iona in the graveyard, and then if Chris is able to find a land, he still has Entomb Reanimate.
Exactly. Rudy draws to a turn. He gets a pretty good defensive card there. It's going to be Swan Song. You see, his other lands are a little less than desirable. There are a Creeping Tarpit and a Caracas. Neither of them can cast Deathrite Shaman this turn. So if he wants to leave up Swan Song, he's going to have to take his whole turn to do it.
Yeah.
And it's going to be Creeping Tarpit and just a pass back. So he's left up the Swan Song if he needs to, and otherwise he'll probably just exile the Iona. And Show and Tell now the draw from Chris, but he has discarded his Iona, so he has no creatures to Show and Tell into play. And with no lands, he's going to lead off on Brainstorm, still searching for it. And let's see if he got there. That's a shake of the head. Elesh Norn, Thoughtseize, another black card. He has now Brainstorm locked himself. Will not find another land for this turn or the next 2.
Yeah, not only is this bad enough, if Rudy's able to find one of his 2 wastelands here, then Chris is really cut off.
Yeah, and you can see it on Chris's face. I think he knows what level of situation he's in right now. He's going to have to try to win on 1 mana. Not that his deck's incapable of it, but it's going to be hard to do it through a Deathrite Shaman. He's going to have to needle the Shaman. Then he's going to have to reanimate get something, then entomb something, then reanimate it, and hope that all of this was allowed to happen. And a second Deathrite Shaman from Rudy. He did exile the Iona on end step, and he passes right back. So hidden on the top from Thoughtseize was a Pithy Needle from Chris, but it's going to get Spell Pierced by Briska, and he is continuing to develop.
Boy.
Oh, gosh. develop his board. And he clears Chris's boards of permanence with a Duran Wasteland, and getting pretty academic here, it's going to be Jace the Mind Sculptor. And Rudy still with the Swan Song up. It's now going to start fate sealing away the game. Sees a show and tell on top of Chris's deck. Happy to leave it there. Yeah. And at this point, Rudy has another Wasteland. He's fate sealing Chris off of lands.
Chris can't take another second of this.
Yeah. So 2-0 in convincing fashion. Rudy Briska deals Chris VanMeter his first loss of the tournament, and that will be his only loss of the tournament as he's eliminated. But Rudy